The morning sun filtered softly through the half-open blinds, casting pale strips of light across the kitchen table. Rachel Warren stirred a spoon through her coffee absent-mindedly, her gaze locked on the pink lunchbox in front of her. "Emma, you've got 5 minutes," she called out, her voice catching slightly with the same maternal urgency she used every school morning. Upstairs, hurried footsteps sounded. Moments later, an 11-year-old girl with auburn braids and a pastel hoodie came bounding down the stairs, a wide grin lighting her freckled face. "I'm ready, Mom." Emma beamed, slipping her backpack on as she grabbed a half-eaten waffle from her plate. Rachel chuckled and handed her the lunchbox. "Eat properly next time," she said, ruffling her daughter's hair. It was an ordinary day in Pine Hollow, Idaho, a place where everyone knew each other's business and kids still rode their bikes to school without fear. Or so Rachel had always believed. The drive to school was brief, filled with chatter about a math quiz and what snacks the other kids were bringing for the Friday picnic. When Rachel pulled up in front of St. Catherine Elementary, Emma leaned over and kissed her cheek. "Love you, Mom," she chirped, hopping out of the car and disappearing into the bustle of morning arrivals. That was the last time Rachel would ever see her daughter. The day unfolded uneventfully at first. Rachel worked from home as a freelance editor, and by mid-afternoon, she had already started preparing dinner. When 3:20 p.m. arrived, she glanced at the clock, expecting the front door to creak open any minute. But the minute turned into 10, then 20. At 4 p.m., panic began to gnaw at her chest. She called the school office. The woman on the line sounded confused. "Emma Warren?" Yes, she was marked present this morning. Rachel's heart pounded as she drove straight to the school. The parking lot was mostly empty, and the last of the staff were leaving. The principal, Mr. Hawthorne, met her at the front office, concern deepening the lines on his face. Together, they reviewed the attendance. Emma had been seen by several classmates during morning recess. A teacher confirmed she had walked back inside when the bell rang, but no one remembered seeing her after 10:30 a.m. They checked the security cameras. Footage from the east hallway, the one leading to Emma's classroom, showed her walking alone, swinging her backpack, her hoodie sleeves flapping. She turned the corner toward her locker. That was it. The next frame showed only the hallway, empty. No Emma. No one else. Just silence, as if she had stepped into thin air. Rachel stared at the screen, numbness spreading through her limbs. "Play it again," she whispered. They did. Over and over. The timestamp didn't lie. Emma had vanished within a span of 8 seconds. Local police were called within the hour. The school was locked down. Classrooms were searched. Ducts, storage closets, the old art wing that hadn't been used in years. Nothing. No signs of struggle. No footprints. No sounds caught on audio. The building yielded no answers. At home, Rachel sat on Emma's bed that night, clutching a crumpled stuffed bear with matted fur and ribbon ears. Daniel, her husband, paced the hallway. He hadn't stopped moving or speaking since the detective left. "She must have left the building," he said again and again. "Someone took her. This isn't possible." But the cameras covering all exits showed nothing. Not a single image of Emma leaving the premises. Not on foot. Not in a car. Not carried. She was simply gone. Over the next few days, Pine Hollow transformed from a sleepy town into a scene of coordinated chaos. Volunteers combed the surrounding woods. Canine units tracked and lost her scent within the school's West Wing stairwell. Helicopters scanned the cornfields nearby. "We will find her," the sheriff told Rachel, though his tone betrayed doubt. But nothing surfaced. No ransom calls. No sightings. No clues. Just one moment Emma was here. The next she wasn't. By day 5, the news spread statewide. Parents gripped their children tighter. Teachers avoided eye contact. Rumors floated like smoke. Trafficking, mental breakdown, secret enemies. Rachel blocked them all out. Her daughter was not a headline. She was real. And she was out there. Somewhere. She refused to believe otherwise. As the days turned into weeks, Rachel began waking at 3 a.m., always from the same dream. Emma standing at the end of a long hallway, whispering something she couldn't hear, before fading into shadow. The morning after Emma's disappearance, Rachel sat stiffly in the front row of the school auditorium, her hands clenched tightly in her lap as Principal Hawthorne addressed a group of teachers and staff. The room was still, filled with faces marked by shock, confusion, and something else, anxiety. Daniel stood beside her, his jaw locked, arms folded across his chest, as though bracing against invisible forces. As of now, Hawthorne said, voice tight with effort, "We're treating this as a missing child investigation. We ask for full cooperation." The teachers nodded, but the air was thick with hesitation. After the assembly, Mrs. Kelsey, Emma's homeroom teacher, approached Rachel with a strange expression, one that didn't match the sympathetic murmurs she offered. "I marked Emma's present that morning," she insisted when asked directly. "I remember clearly. She raised her hand when I called her name. She even answered a question about the morning passage." Rachel stared at her, disbelief blooming in her chest. "You saw her in class?" she asked slowly. "After 10:30? Kelsey faltered. "Well, maybe not after that. But she was there for attendance. I'm sure of it." Rachel turned away, the walls closing in. If Emma was present at roll call, then something happened after. Something fast. Something no one noticed, or chose not to. Later that afternoon, Detective Holloway arranged interviews with Emma's classmates. Most kids remembered her arriving that morning, sitting in her usual spot, laughing during recess. But one girl, Lila Mendoza, hesitated before speaking. She was in Emma's reading group and often sat with her at lunch. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I saw her in the hallway," Lila said, clutching her pink hoodie. "She was walking with a teacher. I didn't recognize her." Rachel leaned in, her breath caught in her throat. "What teacher, sweetheart? What did she look like?" Lila paused, glancing at the floor. She had a long blue dress and a bun in her hair. She looked nice, but different. "Different how?" Holloway asked gently. Lila shrugged. "She didn't wear a badge like the other teachers. And her shoes made this clicking sound, like old lady shoes." Rachel's heart slammed against her ribs. "Are you sure it was a teacher?" "She said she was taking Emma to the nurse," Lila replied, eyes wide. "Emma didn't look sick, but she went with her." Holloway shared a glance with Rachel and Daniel. Moments later, they reviewed the staff registry. No teacher, substitute, administrator, or volunteer had been wearing a blue dress that day. No one matched that description. No one had reported escorting Emma anywhere. Rachel pressed harder. She demanded access to visitor logs, staff schedules, even janitor rotation. Everything came up clean. Maybe she was a parent volunteer, someone suggested. But security logs showed no visitors signed in between 10:15 and noon. The hallway cameras didn't catch the blue-dressed woman either. Just Emma, turning the corner alone. Rachel couldn't let it go. She called other parents, asked them to speak with their kids. 3 more children vaguely remembered seeing a lady in blue walking near the lockers that day. One described her as tall, another as whispery. All of them thought she looked out of place. Rachel's skin prickled with dread. If more than one child saw her, why didn't the school notice? Why hadn't anyone come forward? Emma's desk remained untouched, her notebooks still opened to last week's spelling list. Rachel stood in the empty classroom later that week, the silence deafening. On the chalkboard, someone had written Quiz Friday in bright pink chalk. It was a lie. There would be no quiz. Not without Emma. She ran her fingers across her daughter's desk, noticing a folded note sticking out from the inside flap. Carefully, she opened it. It wasn't addressed to anyone, just a crude sketch of a girl in a hallway, followed by a shadowy figure with what looked like long hair in a bun. The caption underneath read, "She said I was special." Rachel showed the note to Holloway, whose brow furrowed deeply. "It might mean nothing," he said, but the look in his eyes betrayed his doubt. Rumors began to bubble across town. Some said Emma ran away. Others claimed she was kidnapped by someone impersonating school staff. Theories sprouted like weeds: cults, trafficking, supernatural whispers. Rachel ignored them all. She didn't care for gossip. She needed truth. She needed her daughter. When she confronted the principal about the growing list of discrepancies, Hawthorne grew defensive. "We've done everything by protocol," he said, adjusting his tie. "We can't chase phantoms based on children's stories." "They're not stories," Rachel snapped. "They're all we have left." That night, Rachel stood at the edge of the hallway, caught on camera, staring down its length. Lights flickered overhead. Her heart thumped steadily as she whispered into the dark, "Who are you?" The silence answered back. She didn't sleep that night, because sometime just before dawn, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. No words, just an image, grainy, filtered, showing what looked like Emma's backpack, hanging on a rusted hook in a place Rachel had never seen before. Rachel stared at the blurry photo on her phone screen for hours after receiving it. She ran it through enhancement tools, forwarded it to Detective Holloway, posted anonymous inquiries in online forums dedicated to missing persons, and even reached out to a retired FBI analyst through a mutual friend. But no one could confirm where it was taken. The rusted hook, the concrete wall behind it, the faint number 7 etched nearby, none of it matched any public database or location she could trace. Every lead went cold, just like every other piece of hope that came and went like gusts of wind through a broken window. Over the next 6 months, the weight of uncertainty stretched the Warren family thin. Daniel stopped attending the weekly meetings with the search volunteers. He avoided conversations that involved police reports, and he began spending more and more time in the garage, tinkering with old tools or sitting in the car with the radio on and engine off. Sometimes Rachel would find him just staring into the rearview mirror for an hour. They had been together for 16 years, but this was the first time she felt like she didn't know him. He'd always been the practical one, the man of action, but something had hollowed him out from the inside. He stopped shaving, stopped responding to family texts. Some nights, he wouldn't come inside until long after midnight. One morning in early March, exactly 6 months to the day after Emma disappeared, Rachel woke up to silence. The house, usually humming with coffee pots or water heaters or Daniel muttering as he dressed, was still. His side of the bed was untouched. The garage was empty. His keys were gone. The truck was gone. And there was no note. Not a single word. She waited until noon. Then 3. Then night fell. She called his phone. It rang, but he didn't answer. She called the police. They filed a report. Adults are allowed to leave, they told her gently. But it wasn't just leaving. It was erasing. He took nothing except his wallet and driver's license. His work laptop was still on the desk. His boots were by the door. And in the top drawer of the dresser, the framed family photo from last Christmas was gone. Rachel didn't cry. She sat in the hallway that night, in the exact spot Emma's backpack had always been tossed after school, and stared at the shadows on the walls until sunrise. The next few weeks were a blur of obligations, bills, emails, visits from well-meaning friends. Rachel moved through it all like a machine, keeping her voice calm, her face steady. People pitied her. They called her strong. But inside, she felt like a porcelain figurine, one hard tap away from shattering. It wasn't until a rainy afternoon in April, when she went into the storage room to look for tax documents, that she found something that stopped her in her tracks. Daniel's old footlocker was pushed into the far corner, partially hidden beneath a broken suitcase and a rolled-up tent. She hadn't opened it in years. The lock was unlatched. Inside were his baseball cards, a rusted flashlight, some high school memorabilia, and a small red box. She opened the box expecting junk, but inside was a photograph. Rachel instantly recognized Emma. She looked about 6 years old in the picture, standing in front of a merry-go-round, smiling. But it wasn't the setting that chilled her. It was the figure next to Emma, a woman, tall, thin, wearing a blue dress. But the face had been scratched out violently, long diagonal slashes dug into the photo with something sharp, so deep the paper tore in places. Rachel's hands trembled as she turned the photo over. Written in Daniel's handwriting were the words, "Don't forget who she is." Nothing else. No date. No context. Rachel sat on the floor staring at that line, her breath trapped in her throat. "Who?" she whispered, clutching the photo to her chest. She went through the rest of the box, but found nothing else, no notes, no explanations. Just dust, the faint smell of mildew, and that haunting image of her daughter next to a faceless shadow. That night, she called Holloway. "We need to talk," she said. "Something's wrong. Something more than I understood before." But even as she said it, Rachel felt a creeping sense of dread. Because deep down, a quiet question had already begun to form, one she didn't want to ask, but couldn't silence. What did Daniel know that he never told her? And why did he run? The nights after discovering the photograph became increasingly unbearable. Rachel could no longer sleep for more than a few hours at a time. Her mind raced with images of Emma, memories colliding with fears, and always circling back to that haunting question. Who was the faceless woman in the photo, and why had Daniel tried to hide her? The house grew colder with each sleepless night, not in temperature, but in atmosphere. An emptiness had taken root, seeping into the walls, clinging to the air like mildew. Then the dreams began. At first, they were vague, shadows twisting at the edge of her subconscious, faint echoes of laughter or doors creaking open somewhere far away. But then Emma appeared, not as a memory, not as the bubbly girl in old birthday videos, but pale, her face thinner than it had ever been in life, her eyes dark and rimmed in gray, as if sleep had long abandoned her too. She stood before her classroom door, the one caught on the school's last security footage, her lips barely moving as she whispered the same sentence every time. "I'm locked in. Mom, don't trust them." Rachel would wake each time with her heart hammering against her ribs, drenched in sweat, her lungs aching as if she'd been screaming in her sleep. But no sound ever escaped. After the third night, she began keeping a notebook on her nightstand, writing down every detail she could remember. The angle of Emma's head, the light flickering above her, the way her fingers tapped against her side, as if trying to mimic Morse code. One night, she woke with an image burned into her brain, Emma pointing at the blackboard behind her, where faint chalk scribbles read something Rachel couldn't make out, until she squinted at her notes the next morning and realized the phrase was backward, reversed like a mirror. "She watches through the wall." Rachel no longer questioned if the dreams meant something. She accepted them as messages, as cries from the edge of wherever Emma had been taken. But messages from who? From Emma or from something else? One rainy afternoon, while digging through storage bins to find Emma's old art supplies, anything that might offer a clue, a drawing, a memory, Rachel came across the toy chest that had once sat at the foot of her daughter's bed. It was small, pink, and covered in faded stickers. Cartoon foxes, shooting stars, crooked hearts drawn in marker. She hadn't opened it since the police search teams first scoured the house. Kneeling on the dusty hardwood, Rachel flipped the latch and slowly lifted the lid. Inside were broken crayons, a glittery tiara, several folded drawings, and beneath it all, a small blue leather journal with a single unicorn sticker on the cover. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. It was Emma's handwriting, rounded, uneven letters, some smudged with ink or faint pencil erasures. Most entries were innocent, childish. Today, Lila shared her pudding. Dad forgot to pack my apple. I'm scared of the janitor's closet. And then, near the back, the tone shifted. One entry read, "The lady with the long dress talked to me again. She said not to tell anyone." Another, "She was in the hallway today, but the teachers didn't see her. She says they can't." Rachel felt her stomach twist. She flipped to the final page. It was dated one day before Emma disappeared. "Tomorrow, she said she'll take me to a special place. She says no one will find us there. I don't know if I want to go, but she said I'm already chosen." Beneath the final sentence was a drawing, 2 stick figures. One smaller, clearly Emma. The other taller, in a triangular shape that looked like a long dress. The taller figure held the smaller one's hand, leading her toward a door drawn on the far edge of the page. The door had no handle. Rachel pressed the journal to her chest, a choked sound escaping her throat. She sat on the floor for what felt like hours, unable to move, unable to speak. That night, she had another dream. Emma again stood in front of her classroom, but this time, the room behind her was lit with a deep red glow, and the shadows moved. Her voice was louder now, more urgent. She said I belonged to her, but she lied. Mom, Shelit. Rachel jolted awake, gasping. The air around her felt thick, like she was breathing underwater. She stumbled out of bed and into Emma's room, clinging to the journal, the dream still echoing in her mind. That phrase, "I'm already chosen," looped in her thoughts like a cursed lullaby. She opened Emma's closet. Nothing but old jackets, worn shoes, and a torn poster of a pop singer. But something tugged at her, a strange impulse. She ran her fingers along the back wall until her nails caught on a raised ridge. A seam, a panel, something not quite right. The seam behind Emma's closet led nowhere, or at least nowhere obvious. Rachel had pressed along every inch of the panel, trying to pry it loose, tap for hollows, even sliding a butter knife around the edge in desperate hope, but it didn't give. It was either sealed too tightly or purely decorative, a false lead conjured by her desperation and the thick fog of dreams and diary entries. Frustrated but not defeated, she stepped back and stared at the panel for a long time before returning to her bedroom, clutching Emma's journal against her chest like a fragile lifeline. She couldn't sleep, so instead she powered on her laptop. The glow from the screen felt cold on her face in the silence of the room. She typed Pine Hollow Elementary into the search bar, hoping to find something she'd missed, construction permits, older staff records, community rumors, but after nearly an hour of aimless searching, she switched tabs and opened Google Maps. Maybe she could retrace Emma's last visible location, virtually walk the neighborhood, map out the blind spots. It was 3:07 a.m. when she dropped the little yellow Street View man on the map just outside the school grounds. The familiar facade of Pine Hollow Elementary appeared, frozen in bright afternoon light. She navigated along the sidewalk, turning angles, scanning windows, tracing the back entrance and the maintenance lot behind the cafeteria. It felt like trespassing through time. At first, everything looked normal, almost eerily still. Then, as she shifted the view toward the west side, toward the portion of the block where the old annex building had once stood. Her hand stopped on the mouse. There, in one of the upper floor windows of the now demolished structure, was a child. A tiny figure in a pink hoodie stood still behind a dusty pane of glass, face turned slightly downward, not looking at the camera, but at something inside. Rachel's breath hitched in her throat. Her hand flew to her mouth. She zoomed in. The resolution was low, blurred from compression, but the details lined up with an ache she could not ignore. The hair, the slouched shoulders, the posture that matched a dozen photos she'd taken on the first day of 5th grade. It looked like Emma. No, it was Emma. Rachel's fingers moved feverishly as she took screenshots, zoomed again, adjusted the angle slightly. She ran a reverse image search, checked metadata, pulled the capture date from the map overlay. It said the image was taken 8 months after Emma vanished. 8 months. But that couldn't be. The annex was gone. The school had ordered it demolished just 2 months after the incident, citing mold and structural instability. Rachel remembered signing the town petition that supported it. She remembered the news coverage, the photos of excavators, the rubble. She remembered walking past the empty lot. But the image said otherwise. The building stood there as if it had never been touched. She blinked several times, convinced she was hallucinating. She opened a new tab and searched local permit databases, combing through records on demolitions and inspections. It was all there in black and white, demolition complete as of March the year before. City records, school board approvals, even an invoice from a private contractor. But then why was the building intact on the image dated 8 months later? And how? How could her daughter be inside it? She sent the image to Holloway immediately. Check this. Please. Don't tell me I'm seeing things. He didn't reply until 2 hours later. Where did you get this? He asked simply. She told him. He went silent again. Then he called. Rachel, this image is real. Google confirms it. But something's not right. I checked with the Maps team. They logged their capture data internally, and they confirmed the image was taken 8 months post-incident. But the annex? It doesn't exist. Not physically. Not anymore. Not since we tore it down. Rachel clutched the edge of her desk as the room swayed slightly. Then how do you explain the image? I can't, Holloway said. But I'm going to ask someone at the State Archives to pull older satellite footage, drone passes, anything. Meanwhile, I want you to stay out of that area. Rachel didn't respond. Her eyes were still locked on the frozen image of the pink hoodie girl behind the glass. The building looked dead, but the figure did not. Emma looked alive, just trapped, just watching, just waiting. A new thought entered her mind, uninvited, unwanted, but insistent. What if the building had never truly been demolished? What if something else stood there in its place? Rachel sat in the dim light of the local library's archives room, her fingers trembling slightly as she scrolled through yellowed documents on a microfilm reader. The digital ghost of the annex had haunted her all week. Every time she closed her eyes, the image of Emma in that window flashed behind her eyelids, more vivid than any dream, more demanding than any memory. Holloway had managed to obtain a series of grainy aerial photos from the State Archives showing the area around Pine Hollow Elementary over the past 3 decades. Most looked as expected, neighborhoods expanding, new developments rising. But the shots from 8 months after Emma's disappearance contradicted every official record. The annex stood. Not rubble. Not cleared ground. A structure intact, solid, existing. It didn't make sense. The government didn't forget demolitions. Rachel couldn't let it go. She began searching historical building records, but school district files offered no leads beyond blueprints and standard permits. So she turned to something older, Pine Hollow town history. That's how she found herself reading a forgotten article from 1979 tucked into a corner of a now-defunct local paper, the Hollow Tribune. The headline read, "State shuts down Brookfield Center for Youth after abuse allegations." Her eyes widened. Brookfield. That was the original name of the annex building. She quickly scanned the article. It described a controversial experimental facility, housed in what was now the school's West Wing. The center had operated under state funding from 1966 to 1979, intended for juvenile behavioral correction in children ages 7 to 13. Behind the euphemisms, Rachel sensed something darker. The article mentioned controversial methods, sensory deprivation, solitary containment, behavioral restructuring. A whistleblower, a former nurse, had come forward with claims of undocumented quiet rooms and missing logs. The facility was closed quietly after an internal investigation found severe breaches of care protocol, but no criminal charges were ever filed. The building had remained abandoned for nearly a decade before being absorbed into the public school district during an expansion in the early 90s. Rachel's stomach churned. She searched again more precisely this time and found references to Brookfield in two separate town meeting notes from the early 2000s, both citing community discomfort with the building's inclusion in the school grounds. One note, dated 2002, referenced a concerned parent stating, "History is repeating itself." That phrase hit her like a slap. She dug deeper, and that's when she found the names. They weren't on any police site, not officially, but an old PDF from a long-defunct blog titled Vanishing Hollow documented local mysteries. There, in a poorly formatted post, were 3 cases, each nearly forgotten. In 1993, a boy named Caleb Foster, age 9, vanished after being sent to the principal's office for fighting during recess. The last place he was seen was walking past the annex. His case had gone cold in under 2 months. In 2001, a girl named Hannah Reyes, 11, was last seen during a Saturday math tutoring session. Security footage showed her entering the Old West Wing. No record of her ever leaving. In 2011, an 8-year-old named Marcus Bentley disappeared after telling classmates that he heard whispering from the blue lady who lives upstairs. Each 10 years apart, each vanished within school property, each last connected to the same section, the former Brookfield building. Now Emma. 2023, Rachel felt the breath catch in her throat. The math aligned too perfectly. The pattern pulsed like a warning bell. She scribbled the names in her notebook, checking each against old school yearbooks. All 3 children had attended Pine Hollow. All were enrolled in programs that used space from the annex wing before it was supposedly phased out. Rachel flipped through one of the archived blueprints of the annex. A section of the layout was smudged, oddly scanned, the numbering inconsistent, rooms 3A, 3B, then blank space. A section labeled observation for had been manually crossed out in pen. There was something about the penmanship. She froze. It matched the handwriting from the note behind Emma's photo, Daniel's handwriting. Her heart pounded in her ears as she whispered to herself, "What did you know?" She grabbed the copies and raced home, throwing open her husband's remaining storage boxes, digging through papers and folders, searching for any hint, any connection, anything he might have left behind. At the bottom of a dusty manila envelope, she found a small, folded flyer from a 1993 school fundraiser, featuring a group of smiling children, including one labeled Caleb. On the back, scribbled in red ink, were the words, "They're chosen. Every decade. Watch the numbers." Rachel stared at the note until her eyes blurred, the weight of it all pressing down, until she suddenly remembered the numbers carved into the brick near Emma's classroom window, faint, but deliberate. 4-1193. Caleb, Hannah, Marcus, Emma. A rhythm. A countdown. A curse. Rachel barely slept after discovering the pattern in the disappearances. Her mind pulsed with connections, dates, names, handwritings, and now this notion of cycles, of selections, of children vanishing as if offered up every decade to something buried in the very bones of Pine Hollow Elementary. She kept staring at the copy of the red-inked message from Daniel, rereading it until her eyes ached. They're chosen. Every decade. Watch the numbers. It was no longer a theory. It was a ritual, a sequence. She needed someone who had been there, someone who had seen the school from the inside for longer than most. She began calling every former employee she could track down, custodians, substitute teachers, retired nurses. Most were dead ends. Some didn't remember the annex. Others refused to talk. Until she found a number listed under a newspaper article from 2002 titled Voices from the Walls. Staff speak out. The man's name was Leonard Griggs, a former nighttime security custodian who had worked for the district from 1989 to 2010. She dialed with trembling fingers, expecting voicemail. Instead, a raspy voice answered after the second ring. "Who told you to call me?" he asked without greeting. "I read what you said about the annex," Rachel replied quickly. "About hearing voices. My daughter, Emma Warren. She disappeared 2 years ago. Please, I need to know what you saw." A long pause. Then softly, "Your girl." "I remember." Rachel's breath caught. "You remember Emma?" "Not her face," he said. "But I saw her once. Near the old utility stairwell. She was standing by the furnace panel that leads to the lower crawl space. She shouldn't have been there. That place was sealed. Supposedly. Crawl space." Rachel repeated, heart racing. "I never heard of—" "You wouldn't," Leonard interrupted. "They never put on any modern blueprints. But I've seen the original layout. I have a copy. Meet me at the diner on Route 17. Noon tomorrow." He hung up before she could reply. The next day, Rachel arrived early, her nerves unraveling with each tick of a wall clock. Leonard walked in 5 minutes past 12. He was hunched, gaunt, with eyes that had seen too much and lips pressed into a permanent line of caution. He ordered black coffee and nothing else. Then he pulled a folded, brittle sheet from his coat pocket and laid it flat between them. It was a weathered map of Pine Hollow Elementary. The ink had faded, but the annotations remained. Room numbers, wings, access routes. But Rachel immediately noticed something strange. In the bottom right quadrant, below the annex, was a rectangular shape labeled Observation, Sub B. "What is this?" she asked, pointing. "The basement," Leonard said. "Specifically, a locked holding area. We called it the quiet room. You wouldn't find it now. They built over it and cut off all access in the late 80s, said it was too dangerous structurally. But I know they didn't fill it. They just bricked it shut. For decades, no one went down there." "But someone did," Rachel whispered. "Or something was left behind." Leonard nodded slowly. "I work nights. That's when the sounds came. Not always voices. Sometimes just humming, rhythmic tapping, and cold. That unnatural kind that has no business being indoors." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Rachel asked, frustrated. "I did," he replied, voice sharp. "The board ignored me. Said it was old pipes, insulation issues. When the Bentley boy disappeared in 2011, I told police about the subbasement. They laughed. They said it didn't exist." Rachel leaned over the map, tracing her finger along a narrow stairwell indicated beside the west wall. What is this stairwell here?" "That's your way in," Leonard said. "Or it was. But be careful. If the rumors were true, that place wasn't just shut down because of safety." "Then why?" she asked. Leonard hesitated, then whispered, "Because kids said they saw her." "Who?" "The woman in blue. Always in blue. always smiling. She doesn't speak unless you're alone. And if she chooses you, they said, you don't come back the same. Rachel froze. You think, Emma, I think your daughter wasn't taken, Leonard said grimly. She was kept. Her throat tightened. Do you still have access? I kept a master key. Don't ask how. I can show you where the entrance used to be, but you'll have to go alone. I won't step foot near that place again. Rachel clutched the map with both hands. The hallway she had seen in her dreams, the flickering light, the whispering walls. It wasn't just symbolic. It was real. A real space. A real room. She whispered, How deep does it go? Leonard looked her dead in the eyes. Deep enough that you won't hear her scream if she's still down there. Rachel waited until midnight. She'd spent the entire day rehearsing every step, reviewing Leonard's map, checking that her flashlight had fresh batteries, that the burner phone she carried was charged, and that her footsteps wouldn't echo too loudly in the school's tiled corridors. She parked 2 blocks from Pine Hollow and walked the rest of the way under a sky that felt too silent, too complicit. The building loomed in the darkness like a sleeping beast. Her palms sweated as she approached the rear entrance by the old utility ramp Leonard had marked. She slid the borrowed master key into the lock and turned. The mechanism clicked softly and the door creaked open. She held her breath, listening. Nothing stirred. Inside, the hallway stretched out like a memory, pale walls, flickering ceiling bulbs, the faint smell of old textbooks and disinfectant still clinging to the air. She moved quickly, her heart pounding, past the gymnasium and library, until she reached the western corridor where the annex used to connect. The wall at the end looked ordinary, just another blank surface painted a dull institutional beige. But Leonard's instructions had been clear. Stand 6 steps back from the janitor's closet. Place your right hand flat against the wall. Wait 5 seconds. Rachel did exactly that. At first, nothing happened. Then, without warning, a low hum vibrated through the wall, and a vertical crack began to split along the surface. She stepped back as the section of wall shuddered once, then slowly creaked open, without hinges, without a handle, like the mouth of something that had been holding its breath for too long. Beyond the threshold was a stairwell descending into pitch black. Rachel raised her flashlight, its beam catching floating dust motes that spun in spirals like disturbed spirits. The air smelled damp, metallic, and faintly sweet, like old flowers left to rot. Each step groaned under her weight. The walls narrowed, the ceiling dropped slightly, and the silence pressed tighter with every foot downward. At the bottom, the hallway opened into a single corridor lined with concrete. Pipes crisscrossed overhead. Doorways gaped open, but most led into collapsed storage spaces or rooms filled with broken furniture. At the far end was a door that looked untouched, metal, smooth, seamless. No knob, no lock. She approached cautiously, reached out to touch it, but instead of the door reacting, the wall to the left of it pulsed warm under her fingertips, and with a gentle click, the panel slid open to reveal a room bathed in still, muted light. She stepped inside. The air was still. Dust hung like fog. The space was small, just wide enough for a desk, a narrow cot, and a faded chalkboard. But what stopped Rachel cold was the desk. It was wooden, old, scratched, covered in years of grime. But carved deeply into its surface, almost with reverence, were the letters, Emma W. Her throat clenched. She reached out, brushing away dust, and then saw something tucked into the corner of the desk. A sheet of folded paper. She unfolded it with shaking hands. It was a child's drawing, done in colored pencil Emma style, no doubt. The picture showed a family of 3, a girl, a father, and a mother. But only the girl and the father were filled in. The mother's outline remained blank, traced but never colored, her eyes missing, her form hollow. Rachel stared at it, her breath coming in shallow gasps. At the bottom, written in faint blue ink, were the words, "Maybe if I finish this, she'll remember me." Her knees buckled slightly. She sank into the nearby cot, clutching the drawing, her eyes darting around the room. Toys, books, an old backpack with a broken zipper lay scattered. But there were no signs of anyone else. No chains. No locks. Just a quiet place built to contain, to isolate, to erase. Her fingers traced the letters of Emma's name again, her tears smearing the dust. The dreams, the drawings, the whispers, they had all been true. Her daughter had been here, not as a prisoner, not exactly, but as someone kept, observed, remembered just enough to be forgotten again. Rachel rose slowly, her legs unsteady, and moved toward the far wall, where a second paper lay on the floor beneath a water-stained tile. She picked it up and flipped it over. It was another drawing, but this one was newer, fresher. The ink hadn't faded. It showed the same room, same desk, same bed, but with a shadow in the corner. Tall, thin, wearing blue. The figure had no face, but its hands were long, curved, drawn in loops around the edges of the room, as though reaching out to surround everything inside. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the drawing in her hand, the image of a faceless woman in blue looming in the background, arms stretching out like vines crawling across the walls. She blinked hard, lowering the paper slowly, and let her eyes adjust to the dim light once more. The room felt tighter now, as though the walls had quietly crept closer while she was distracted. Something shifted in the stillness, a subtle creak behind her. She turned around sharply and noticed a section of the far wall she hadn't seen when she first entered. The surface appeared smooth, but a faint outline revealed a panel or frame embedded into the concrete. She stepped forward cautiously, heart pounding with each step, and reached out to brush away the dust. Her fingertips caught on the edge of a glass surface. It was a photo, a large, framed photo hanging flush against the wall, so muted by grime and time that it had blended into the background. Rachel wiped it clean with her sleeve, and the image underneath sent a chill down her spine. It was Emma. Her daughter stood in the middle of the frame, smiling softly, wearing the same pink hoodie she'd worn the morning she vanished. But the shock came from the woman standing next to her, Rachel herself. The resemblance was undeniable. Her face, her posture, her eyes. But her expression was unfamiliar, serene, detached, and entirely devoid of warmth. She was dressed in a flowing blue dress, the same shade described by the children who saw the lady. The same blue that had appeared in Emma's drawings, her journal entries, her dreams. Rachel staggered back, her head spinning. It didn't make sense. She had never worn that dress. She had never taken that photo. Yet there it was, undeniable, immortalized in a dusty frame deep beneath the school. Her mouth went dry. "What the hell is this?" she whispered aloud, her voice barely echoing. As if an answer, a faint mechanical click echoed through the room. Then a soft static hum rose from a speaker embedded somewhere overhead. A woman's voice began to play, soft, measured, emotionless. "She will only find her child," it said, "if she's willing to confront the truth she chose to forget." Rachel froze, eyes darting toward the ceiling. The voice continued. "She cannot reclaim what she abandoned unless she steps back into the memory she buried." The static returned, followed by silence. Rachel's knees gave way, and she sat hard on the edge of the cot, hands trembling. "What memory?" she whispered. "What did I forget?" She searched her mind for answers, digging through years of memories, Emma's childhood, the early school years, the last week before she vanished. But there was nothing that explained this, nothing that accounted for an entire fabricated photo of herself in the very dress that haunted her daughter's stories. Then another sound broke through the quiet, a faint ticking, like a metronome buried in the walls. Rachel stood again and looked around, eyes catching on a narrow file cabinet wedged behind the desk. She pulled it open. Inside were folders, labeled only by years, 1993, 2001, 2011. The same years the other children had vanished. Her fingers hovered, then paused at the last folder, 2023. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printout, surveillance stills. The image showed Emma, time-stamped just minutes after the final footage Rachel had seen at the school. But this version was different. Emma wasn't alone. She was holding the hand of someone at the edge of the frame, a woman in blue. Her face was partially obscured by light blur and movement, but the outline of the jaw, the curve of the brow, it looked like Rachel, a younger Rachel. She dropped the folder. Her breath hitched, the air around her suddenly too heavy to inhale. Was it a manipulation? A hallucination? A planted lie? Or had something been erased, something terrible, something unbearable? She staggered toward the door, but it hadn't reopened. The walls stayed still. The lights dimmed slightly. She looked back at the drawing, then at the photo, then at the voice recorder embedded above the chalkboard. Her voice cracked. "What did I do?" The speaker clicked again, and a second voice played, Emma's. "Mom, please come back. But only if you remember." The recording cut off with a sharp click. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It pulsed. It waited. Rachel turned in a slow circle, staring at the walls that now felt more like skin than stone, a memory pressing inward, a presence she could not name watching from just beyond reach, and somewhere faint buried, she felt a door inside her mind begin to creak open. Rachel stood in the center of the room, her pulse thudding loud enough to drown out her thoughts, but not the sensation growing in her chest, a slow, creeping realization that didn't come with lightning or sudden insight, but instead with the familiar weight of something long avoided, long buried, now clawing its way into the light. Her eyes scanned the room again, the desk with her daughter's name, the unfinished family drawing, the photograph that should not exist, and the voice that said she had to face what she had tried to forget. The truth came not in a rush, but in fragments, memories that had always been dismissed as dreams or stress-induced hallucinations, now aligning into something undeniable. She was sitting on the floor, back against the cold wall, when the memory pierced through like a crack in glass, spreading outward. It had been 7 years ago, just after Emma turned 4, during the winter Rachel barely remembered for reasons she never questioned. Daniel had been traveling more for work, and Rachel, still silently battling postpartum depression that had never fully resolved, had begun experiencing dissociative episodes, brief blackouts that no one noticed because she always seemed to function again afterward. She had told herself it was exhaustion, hormones, grief from losing her mother that year, but now she remembered the worst of it. One cold February afternoon, she had picked Emma up early from daycare after a panic attack at home, convinced that someone was watching them, that the windows had eyes, that the safest place was somewhere hidden. She had driven to Pine Hollow, the school where she once volunteered, and where a friendly janitor had let her inside more than once to pick up supplies for the PTA. She remembered Emma in the back seat, hugging her stuffed rabbit, asking where they were going. Rachel had smiled, but her smile was wrong, empty, mechanical. They entered the building through the rear utility door, the same one she'd used days ago, and she'd led Emma into the annex, into this very room, her mind clouded, desperate for stillness. She told Emma to stay there, just for a little while, promising she'd be right back. She even left her daughter's lunchbox beside her and a flashlight. She told herself it would be 10 minutes. She just needed to breathe. She walked out, closed the door, and never turned back that night. Instead, she drove home, curled into the couch, and awoke the next morning with no memory of what had happened. Daniel had returned from his trip, and found her catatonic. They thought it was a breakdown. Rachel never mentioned the hours before. When she realized Emma wasn't in the house, her screams had shaken the walls. The police were called. The search began. And then, by some miracle, Emma had wandered back from the school by late morning, dirty, cold, but silent. She never said a word about where she'd been. And Rachel, too terrified of what her own mind might reveal, never asked. Daniel told the police she'd gone missing for less than an hour, that she'd probably wandered off. They didn't investigate further. And no one, not even Rachel herself, connected that forgotten day to the child's disappearance years later. But Emma remembered. Of course she did. The drawings, the blue dress, the woman in the hallway. Rachel hadn't just been the mother who lost her child. She had also been the first one who'd ever left her behind. The woman in blue wasn't a stranger. She was the fragmented echo of Rachel's own dissociation, Emma's attempt to process being abandoned in a place that grew into a myth in her young mind, a specter that returned year after year until it swallowed her again. Rachel pressed her palms to her face, her breath catching in quiet sobs that shook her to her core. "I'm sorry," she whispered aloud. "I didn't remember. I didn't want to see it." The speaker on the wall clicked again. Static filtered in, then softened, and a familiar voice came through, not the voice of the mechanical woman, but of a little girl. "Mom, are you there?" Rachel jumped to her feet. "Emma." The voice paused. "You left once, but I know you didn't mean to. She said you wouldn't come back this time, but I waited anyway." Rachel's knees gave, but she stayed standing. "Emma, I'm here. I'm not leaving again. I swear it." A soft hum buzzed from the wall behind the chalkboard. Another seam split open. A hidden door. Slowly, as if pushed by a hesitant hand, it creaked ajar. A faint light spilled out, pale, warm, unmistakably real. Rachel stepped toward it, her fingers trembling as she gripped the edge and pushed it wider. Inside was a smaller chamber, its walls covered in chalk drawings, and in the center, curled beneath a blanket beside a small lamp, was Emma. Her eyes were wide. She looked thinner, older in a way that wasn't measured in years, but in the weight of memory. Rachel fell to her knees, tears breaking freely. "I found you," she choked out. "I found you again." Emma blinked slowly, then nodded. "You remembered." Rachel pulled her into her arms, heart pounding against her daughter's fragile frame. In that moment, nothing else mattered, not the questions, not the years, not the guilt. Only the promise made and finally kept. Only the silence broken by a breath shared between mother and child. But outside the chamber, down the hall, in the quiet of the deep walls, a whisper stirred, soft, low, almost satisfied, as if the building itself had been waiting for closure, or perhaps for the next story to begin. If this story gripped you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more haunting mysteries and emotional journeys. What part of the story gave you chills or made you tear up? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one.